Hi, I'm Tim Janisowski. Welcome to Spotlight Philippians. I'm still inviting you to joy in each one of these little short devotions. And as you can tell by making them short, we're making our way very slowly through this joy-filled and joyful letter that Paul writes to his beloved friends in the church of Philippi, somewhere around 60 AD. So let's continue today. We see that in verse 18, Paul says, "In these things I rejoice." We're answering the question, what is he rejoicing in, and how can we rejoice in the same sorts of things? First of all, he's rejoicing because the gospel is being advanced exactly because Paul is in a bad situation. He's in prison under house arrest, but it's making the gospel go forward in new and exciting ways, so Paul rejoices. Secondly, we saw last time, Paul's rejoicing because it's inspiring his fellow Christians in Rome who are free men and women to share Jesus without fear. We come to the third of Paul's reasons for rejoicing in today's devotional. I'm reading to you from chapter 1, verses 15 through 17. Paul writes, "Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment." Now, this is really interesting. What Paul is saying is that while he is in prison, there are certain people who are preaching the gospel in the free world, and they're doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it to get the good news out and to encourage Paul in his situation. But curiously, there's another group of people that are preaching the gospel, the true gospel, and they're doing it as a gotcha at Paul. They're doing it to spite Paul out of envy. They're doing it out of selfish desire and personal ambition. Not the right reasons at all. And yet Paul is able to say, "I nevertheless will rejoice." What's the point here? Well, I remember in my first church in Asheville, North Carolina, one of the church leaders said, "You know, Pastor," and I was a very young pastor, "you got to take into account, God makes a lot of straight shots with crooked sticks." Think about that. God makes a lot of straight shots with crooked sticks. And these people who were acting out of selfish ambition and envy and rivalry to Paul, they were crooked sticks in the church itself. And nevertheless, they were still proclaiming the true gospel, the straight shot, the great motive of God's love, the great message of Jesus coming, the great call to response by believing, and the great result, life now and forevermore. God makes lots of straight shots with crooked sticks. And sometimes you and I are those crooked sticks that God nevertheless uses to make his straight shots. And Paul's willing to say, you know, that's not a perfect situation. I wish it were not that way. There ought to be no room within the Church of Jesus Christ for people acting out of contention and rivalry and selfish ambition. But unfortunately, there is still a good bit of the world in the church today. But even when that's the case, as long as the true gospel's going forward, I'll find a way to rejoice in it. And Paul was exactly the opposite way, for instance, in the book of Galatians, where people were preaching furiously, but they had perverted and changed the gospel. And when they changed the gospel, they were crooked sticks with a crooked message, and Paul would give them no quarter whatsoever. You know, there are four different combinations for why we do things. We do the right things with the right motives. That's Paul and what he's doing. We do the right things with the wrong motives. Those were Paul's opponents in the church, and it hurt Paul, I'm sure, deeply. But they nevertheless were still doing the right things. Maybe we need to check our motives and see what is going on for what motivates us to do the right things. And then, of course, some people do the wrong thing with the right motives. They mean well, they intend well, they just don't get it right. And then there's some people who do the wrong thing with the wrong motives, and that is evil through and through. So let's be working in our own lives to ask God to do the right things for the right motives, most particularly the right thing of advancing the gospel with the right reason, that God might get the glory. That is Spotlight Philippians. That's our invitation to joy. And of course, I invite you to continue to read, to reflect, and by all means, respond. We'll talk to you next time.